Hello and welcome, my name is Hoshiko, and today's Cinematography video is all about the differences and similarities of C-stand based silks and softboxes, and why you might choose one over the other for cost or flexibility reasons. So on the surface level, an 18 by 24 silk and a smaller size softbox might seem pretty similar in their effects. They're around the same size. If they both use a silk as the material, then they probably will have a similar light reduction while also having a similar quality to the diffusion. But a C-stand based silk needs a C-stand, and a softbox can attach right to the front of your lamp. Softboxes are generally cheaper and less labor intensive to work with though, also. So why choose one over the other? And some people would then also ask, why choose a C-stand silk over a softbox if our goal is to diffuse light on a budget? I mean, in the end, they both scatter the light, right? Well, yes and no. These ideas seem to overlook a few critical differences that make each useful in their own right and for their own purposes, sometimes interchangeably, but sometimes not. The biggest factor here is that the softbox is attached to the front of the lamp itself, and the silk isn't. So what does that mean for us though? Well, let's start by talking about the attributes of the softbox in particular. Now, when we move this, it's going to be a singular unit because it's attached to the lamp. The distance between the diffusion material and the lamp is now a fixed parameter instead of a variable. That's really important. And when we move it all at once. The fall off is going to be relative to the front silk piece here. And then we have the matter of the inside of the softbox being a reflective material, so it will actually push a little bit more light through the diffusion material. And lastly, the edges of the softbox help us control the light's direction and push it through that material rather than having it go up, down, left, right, and all around. So now let's take a look at the C-stand based silk. First off, unless you are flagging a lot, you're going to have spill around the edges of the silk, or you won't be able to illuminate the entirety of the surface all at one time like a softbox can. But the main factor here is that the silk and the lamp with this type of setup are not attached to each other and can be moved independently. This gives you way more flexibility for the angle of the light, and you can rotate that silk in pretty much any direction that the gobo head and arm will allow for, and your scene dictates. This can really help shape your light. But if you do place a silk about 18 inches away from your lamp, it will look reasonably similar to the softbox option, which is generally less costly. But this very separation is the biggest factor in this conversation and why these two setups are inherently different. If you want to make your light softer, you can move the silk towards the subject. If you want to make your light harder, you can move the silk further away. If you want to make your exposure lower, you can move the lamp further away while keeping the silk in place and not have a change in the quality of your light, softer or harder. This is because of the rule that's always important to consider when planning your lighting. Sources that are further away are going to be harder, and sources that are closer up will be more diffuse. It's about the relative size of the source to your subject, and the final material the light passes through, in effect, is the source. In this case, either the softbox-based silk or the C-stand-based silk. And that means that if you're going to take your softbox lamp and move it further away from the subject, the exposure will drop and the shadows will get harder. Whereas if you take your lamp and move it further away from the C-stand silk, only the exposure will change. No matter how much you're scattering the light through a diffusion material, the size relative to the subject will still influence the hardness. Here are a few examples to help further illustrate this lesson. So we have our first lighting setup here. We're starting out with just the hood for that baseline, and it's about a 45-degree angle to her face. We're making sure we get these hard shadows so that when we put on the softbox and the silk, we can really see the difference. Okay, so now we have here a softbox. Now this softbox and this silk are almost identical in size. I think that's gonna be fine. They're gonna be comparable. So we can see really quite immediately how this has softened out the shadow along the side of the nose and under the eye, and it wraps a lot more smoothly. Something about this that I think is a really good argument for using softboxes frequently is that this was super easy to put together. I don't need to have a C-stand. I don't need to have another actual silk. I can just use my Bowens mount on the actual lamp and hook that softbox on, and then when I move the stand, it's going to just be already all attached. I don't have to readjust everything. I think that is a really positive argument for using softboxes if they work for your overall usage. So now we have our silk set up, and it's about the same distance between the actual LED element on the lamp and the silk, just like I said with the softbox here, because this is a constrained distance. And so just like the softbox, you could see how much more this wraps around. I mean, the edge here is coming all the way up this far, which is about the same as the softbox. And that just is so much more space than the hood by itself. And it does wrap it around. And so you can see these much softer looking shadows. And so yes, both of those look pretty similar actually. I mean, if you think about it, the distance between the actual LED and the silk remains about the same, and the distance to the subject remains about the same. So they're going to look very similar, even if the materials are slightly different, or the hood aspect and the internal reflections inside the softbox create a little bit of difference. But now I'm going to show you what happens when I leave the silk in the same spot, but I move the lamp much further away. Let's pretend that maybe this lamp doesn't have dimming control, or you've kind of maxed out the dimming control that you're available to use, and you still want it a little less bright. Well, you can move that lamp backwards, and in doing so, you lower the overall exposure on the face. So that's what we're going to kind of simulate here. The other thing that I want to notice here is that that lamp being much further away, still using the hood, its actual casting of light is much bigger now than the silk, and so you see a lot more spill. We can see actually it's hard in the actual shot, but you can see the C-stand being projected onto the wall there. So you would need to flag that off with something. We're not losing the shape of our shadows. They didn't get harder again. We still have this wrap, we still have these softer edges, especially along the nose. It just is all exposure down. That really is the strength of this setup. You can change how these pieces are working together. You can move that lamp a little bit further away, and you won't change the shape of the shadows, because this silk is basically your new source, and the silk is lighting our subject. And one other thing about using silks and C-stands is that I can angle this. I can go and bring it in at a 45-degree angle, and that changes how the light looks. I can raise and lower it. And just because it's not attached to the lamp, when I make those changes, they are working independently of the lamp itself. That's not the case for the softbox. So now I'm going to show you what I mean by what happens when we move the silk backwards and these shadows get harder a little bit. So while still much softer than the hood, we can see that we once again have a harder line underneath the eye and across the nose. So now we have our softbox on the lamp, and they're about 6 feet away, just like we had when we did the silk with the lamp, about 6 feet away. So this look should be relatively similar, but we are dimmer by moving these lamps and our diffusion back. Now, that means that this relative size has caused these shadows to get harder again. You can even see the nose shadow right here just a little bit. And we didn't have that when we had the silk right here about 3 feet away, and then the lamp about 6 feet away. And that's really the difference between these two options. When the silk is attached to the lamp in the softbox form, moving that lamp further back will make those shadows harder. When you have the silk attached to a C-stand and independent of your lamp, that means when you move your lamp around further away or closer up, it won't affect the shape of the shadows. At the same time, this is still way more diffused than when we used the hood, because it is still a more diffused source than not. And it's not having the light being directed by the reflector hood, and instead it is being passed through a diffusion material. So this is still softer than using the hood, but at the same time, it is harder than if you put the silk on a C-stand right up close. So that really shows you the difference between using just all softboxes all the time versus having silks and softboxes and using them where they fit best.
And so this is the main consideration when picking which one you want to invest in or use for a project.
Can you afford your shadows getting harder if you need to move the softbox further away? Or do you want to have almost limitless flexibility when using a silk on a C-stand and being able to position it and the lamp completely independently to dial in your softness and exposure? Obviously, in either of these cases, having the invention of dimmable LED lights really helps because the solution for too much exposure now isn't to just move the lamp backwards a few feet, like it often was when you were using lamps that maybe weren't dimmable or didn't have readily available dimming units. And that always risked making the light either harder or softer depending on which direction you needed to go. To me, there really is a value in both of these. Softboxes save a lot of time, but sacrifice a lot of flexibility, especially with light hardness. But you can get a really large piece of diffusion for a lower expense. While C-stand based silks take a lot more time and expense, both in terms of gear and labor, but offer much, much more flexibility with angles and source distance. I use both of these very often, and in situations where you have to reduce the number of stands on your floor, softboxes are a miracle tool to work with. So if you've ever asked yourself why you should spend money on a C-stand and silk diffusion versus just getting a $40 large softbox to go straight onto your lamp, I hope that answers your question and gives you some options to think about when planning your next project's filming. Let me know if you have any questions about these types of setups. You can leave those in the comments down below. And I do want to mention that I'm trying to reach over 20 patrons on my Patreon between the paid tiers that start at just $2 and my free tier that keeps you updated for when new videos release. So if you want to join me over there, I'd be happy to have you. If you want to pick up tools like the ones we've been talking about today for your own kit, I have affiliate links down in the video description that help support this channel as well. And if you're someone who likes lighting and cinematography videos like this one, please give the video a like to help me with the YouTube algorithm and reaching new viewers who also like these kinds of videos. You can also subscribe for upcoming videos about tools and techniques for cinematography, lighting, and micro-budget filmmaking in general. I do hang out probably too much on social media when I'm not on YouTube, so if you want to connect on Blue Sky, Mastodon, or Hey.cafe, you can find those links down in the description as well. I sincerely appreciate you watching, and please, if you're given the opportunity to go out of your way to help somebody this week, please do it. You never know how much it might mean to them and to you as well. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you next time. Peace.